HARLOW'S revenge. My husband and sister stole my medical AI for $1 billion payout, so I fed them a terminal virus. My name is HARLOW. For as long as I can remember, I have been driven by a singular obsessive goal: to map the invisible architecture of the human body using the flawless logic of machines. Before we continue, please subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps this powerful, life-changing story reach the world. I lost my mother to a highly aggressive, misdiagnosed autoimmune disease when I was a teenager. The doctors missed the subtle, early warning markers hidden deep within her blood work until it was entirely too late. From that devastating day forward, I vowed that human error would never again be the final arbiter of life and death. I spent my 20s living in cramped, windowless dormitories, earning dual doctorates in computational biology and advanced artificial intelligence. While my peers were out socializing, I was writing millions of lines of complex code, training neural networks to recognize the microscopic, catastrophic anomalies that human doctors routinely overlook. By the time I turned 32, I had successfully founded my own biotech software firm, Aegis Diagnostics. I had built a revolutionary, predictive medical AI that could accurately diagnose terminal illnesses months, sometimes years, before any physical symptoms manifested. I thought I was holding the cure to human suffering. I had no idea I was holding the exact weapon that would be used to destroy my own life. Building Aegis Diagnostics from a scrappy, underfunded startup into a highly respected medical technology firm was a grueling, all-consuming war of attrition. I was the brilliant, exhausted architect behind the glowing monitors, sleeping under my desk and surviving on cold coffee. Because I was entirely consumed by the highly complex, technical demands of the software, I desperately needed a team I could trust with my life to handle the cutthroat business administration. I turned to the two people I loved most in the world. I appointed my charismatic, sharp-suited husband, Julian, as the chief financial officer. I hired my younger, fiercely ambitious sister, Mia, as the director of public relations. Together, we were the ultimate, unstoppable trinity. Julian handled the aggressive venture capital negotiations and the complex corporate structuring, while Mia crafted a brilliant, emotionally resonant media narrative around my mother's death to attract massive global investors. I trusted them both implicitly. I handed them the absolute unhindered keys to my kingdom, completely blinded by familial loyalty and deep, unquestioning love. For the first 4 years, our dynamic functioned flawlessly. The Aegis AI was successfully completing its final, rigorous clinical trials, returning diagnostic accuracy rates that absolutely shattered global medical standards. We were on the precipice of a massive, industry-disrupting breakthrough. Major hospital networks and pharmaceutical giants were aggressively circling our small firm, desperate to license the technology. I was working 100-hour weeks, personally refining the core algorithms and securing the final FDA compliance certifications. I was exhausted, but I was euphorically happy, believing that Julian, Mia, and I were about to change the world and secure an unbreakable generational legacy. Julian constantly reassured me that our legal frameworks were ironclad, while Mia managed my chaotic public schedule with a bright, supportive smile. I was so incredibly focused on saving lives through my computer screens that I completely failed to notice the dark, toxic alliance forming in the shadows of my own boardroom. The first subtle, creeping red flags began to appear just as the Aegis software entered its final valuation phase. Julian and Mia started taking frequent, unexplained strategy retreats to luxury resorts in Aspen and Miami, claiming they were aggressively courting elite, high-net-worth investors who demanded absolute discretion. Julian became incredibly guarded with the corporate financial ledgers, changing the administrative access protocols and strictly locking me out of the primary accounting servers. He smoothly claimed it was a standard, mandatory security measure required by our impending federal audits. Mia's behavior also drastically shifted. My previously warm, affectionate sister became cold, distant, and hypercritical of my appearance and my introverted management style. Whenever I walked into a room, their hushed, intense conversations would abruptly stop. I felt a cold, deep sense of unease settling into my stomach, but I forcefully pushed the paranoia aside. I was a scientist, not a cynic. I demanded empirical evidence before I made an accusation, and I simply couldn't fathom that my own blood and my chosen life partner would ever betray me. The devastating apocalyptic truth finally clawed its way into the light on a quiet, rainy Thanksgiving weekend. Julian and Mia had gone into the city to supposedly pick up catering for our family dinner. I was alone in our massive quiet house, searching for a misplaced digital stylus in Julian's home office. I accidentally knocked over a heavy decorative bronze statue on his bookshelf. When the statue hit the floor, the heavy wooden base shattered, revealing a small hollow cavity carved directly into the wood. Nestled inside the dark cavity was a sleek, encrypted burner phone and a tiny high-capacity flash drive. My heart instantly dropped into my stomach. My hands shaking violently, I plugged the hidden flash drive into my secure laptop and bypassed the basic encryption using a brute force decryption script I had written in college. The files that populated my screen did not just shatter my marriage and my family. They completely, violently obliterated my entire reality. The flash drive contained hundreds of highly explicit, sickeningly romantic text messages and photographs. Julian and Mia were not just having a sordid, profoundly, deeply unnatural affair. They had been sleeping together for over 2 years. But the infidelity was merely the disgusting appetizer to a much larger, incredibly sociopathic main course. The drive also contained a massive trove of highly classified, heavily drafted legal documents and corporate emails. They were secretly communicating with the ruthless billionaire CEO of Titan Pharma, one of the largest, most aggressive pharmaceutical monopolies on the planet. Julian and Mia were meticulously orchestrating a hostile multi-billion-dollar corporate coup. They had brokered a massive back-channel deal to completely sell Aegis Diagnostics and my proprietary AI to Titan Pharma for a staggering $3 billion in pure, untaxed offshore equity. But to close the massive deal and secure the money solely for themselves, they had to entirely eliminate me from the equation. I sat in the cold, silent office, reading their horrific, calculated plan. Because I owned the absolute majority share of the company and possessed a strict, ironclad moral right to the intellectual property, Julian couldn't simply vote me out. Instead, they had engineered a highly complex, deeply sinister frame-up. Over the past 6 months, Julian had intentionally, secretly routed highly sensitive, unencrypted patient medical data through my personal administrative terminal. He was artificially manufacturing a catastrophic, massive HIPAA violation and a federal data breach, intentionally making it look exactly as if I, Harlow, had been recklessly negligent with the lives of thousands of patients. Their plan was to abruptly discover the massive breach next week, aggressively leak the scandal to the press, and use the ensuing public relations nightmare to trigger a predatory morality clause in our founding documents. They were going to forcefully legally terminate me, seize my equity to save the company from federal ruin, and then instantly sell my life's work to Titan Pharma. The betrayal was so vast, so deeply cruel and intimate, that it physically suffocated me. My own sister, my own husband, they were planning to burn my reputation to the ground, send me to federal prison for medical data mishandling, and walk away with $3 billion built entirely on my genius and my mother's tragedy. I spent 3 hours completely paralyzed on the office floor, drowning in a dark, terrifying ocean of grief and raw, bleeding humiliation. But as the initial shock began to recede, the cold, brilliant, highly analytical mind of a software architect took over. If I confronted them now, Julian would immediately trigger the data breach, destroy the servers, and unleash his expensive corporate lawyers. I was entirely outgunned in the legal arena. I couldn't fight them in a courtroom and I couldn't appeal to their humanity because they clearly had none. I had to fight them in the only arena where I possessed absolute godlike control. I had to fight them in the code. I meticulously copied every single file, every text message, and every fraudulent legal draft from the flash drive onto my own heavily encrypted offline server. I wiped the drive of my digital fingerprints, placed it back into the shattered bronze statue, and meticulously glued the base back together so it looked entirely undisturbed. When Julian and Mia returned home with the Thanksgiving catering, laughing and sharing a secret, knowing look, I greeted them with a warm, bright smile. I carved the turkey, I poured the expensive wine, and I played the role of the devoted wife and loving sister with terrifying, absolute perfection. I did not flinch when Julian kissed my cheek. I did not scream when Mia hugged me. I simply stared into their lying eyes and made a silent, unbreakable vow. They wanted to steal my intelligence to build their kingdom. I was going to let them steal it, but I was going to make absolutely certain that the crown was forged from pure, highly explosive poison. The next morning, I drove to the Aegis corporate headquarters at 4 a.m., long before the executive staff arrived. I locked myself inside the primary highly secure server room. I did not attempt to fix the fake data breach Julian had planted. That was their trap, and I needed them to spring it perfectly to implicate themselves. Instead, I focused entirely on the core algorithm of the Aegis medical AI. Over the next 48 hours, fueled by pure, cold adrenaline, I initiated a massive, deeply hidden architectural fork in the software. I created a flawless, highly sophisticated decoy. The decoy AI functioned absolutely perfectly in closed, simulated environments. It would flawlessly diagnose the test datasets that Titan Pharma would undoubtedly use during their rigorous due diligence audits. It looked exactly like my masterpiece, but deep within the neural network, I buried a highly complex, dormant digital logic bomb. The logic bomb was a masterpiece of malicious compliance. I programmed the decoy algorithm to fundamentally collapse only when it was connected to a live, external hospital network and fed real-time, encrypted patient data. Once deployed in the real world, the AI would not just fail. It would aggressively hallucinate. It would confidently diagnose healthy patients with terminal cancer, and it would clear critically ill patients as perfectly healthy. It was a massive, catastrophic medical liability waiting to detonate. Furthermore, I hard-coded an undeniable, heavily encrypted digital watermark directly into the root directory of the decoy. The watermark explicitly detailed that the software was an unauthorized, incomplete beta version stolen by Julian and Mia, completely legally absolving me of any liability for its deployment. I migrated the real, authentic Aegis algorithm onto a secure, offline physical hard drive, deleted it entirely from the company's mainframes, and left the poison decoy sitting perfectly on the server for them to steal. The corporate coup executed exactly as they had planned. On a Tuesday morning, I was suddenly and aggressively summoned to an emergency board meeting. Julian and Mia sat at the long mahogany table, flanked by a team of highly expensive, ruthless corporate lawyers. Julian stood up, his face an incredibly convincing mask of deep sorrow and grave disappointment. "Harlow," he stated formally, placing a thick stack of fabricated audit reports on the table. "Our internal security team has just uncovered a massive, catastrophic vulnerability in your personal administrative servers. You have recklessly exposed the highly classified medical data of over 50,000 patients. The federal regulators are already preparing massive indictments." Mia looked at me, shedding a brilliant, completely fake tear. "We are so sorry, Harlow," she whispered. "But the board has voted unanimously. We are invoking the emergency morality clause. You are terminated as CEO, effective immediately. Security will escort you off the premises." I delivered the greatest acting performance of my life. I gasped, I sobbed, and I desperately pleaded with them, wildly claiming that I had been hacked and that I would never endanger patient data. The lawyers stared at me with cold, reptilian indifference. Two massive, armed security guards grabbed my arms and physically dragged me out of the boardroom. Julian watched me go, a tiny, deeply arrogant smirk playing at the very corner of his mouth. I was thrown out onto the cold concrete sidewalk in front of my own towering corporate building, clutching a small cardboard box of my personal desk items. I sat on the curb, weeping into my hands for the benefit of the security cameras. But the moment I climbed into the back of a taxi and the corporate building disappeared from view, my tears instantly vanished. My posture straightened, and my eyes went completely dark. The first phase was complete. I was officially out of the blast radius. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to push the detonator. The next 3 months were a masterclass in psychological patience. I moved into a small, highly secure apartment under an assumed name, completely disappearing from the public eye. I hired the most terrifyingly aggressive, fiercely intelligent federal whistleblower attorney in the country, a man named Marcus Vance. I handed Marcus the encrypted flash drive containing the undeniable proof of Julian and Mia's affair, their conspiracy to fabricate the data breach, and their illegal backchannel negotiations with Titan Pharma. We quietly handed this massive, explosive dossier directly to the highest levels of the FBI's Cybercrime Division and the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Because I was fully cooperating and providing undeniable digital forensics proving I was framed, The federal agencies granted me absolute sweeping immunity. They agreed to hold off on their massive, highly aggressive criminal raids until Julian and Mia finalized the multi-billion-dollar sale, ensuring the maximum possible federal charges for corporate wire fraud and illegal market manipulation. Meanwhile, Julian and Mia were living like absolute royalty. With me entirely out of the picture, they moved with blinding speed to finalize the acquisition. The business press lauded them as brilliant, highly resilient executives who had successfully saved a struggling biotech firm from the reckless negligence of its erratic, disgraced founder. Titan Pharma, driven by their own massive unchecked corporate greed, completely rushed through the final due diligence audits. They tested the Aegis AI in a closed simulated server environment. Because I had designed the decoy to perform flawlessly in simulations, the Titan Pharma executives were absolutely mesmerized. They completely failed to realize they were looking at a hollow, highly dangerous facade. Eager to absolutely dominate the global medical technology market, they happily signed the massive contracts, transferring $3 billion into Julian and Mia's newly formed, highly secure corporate holding accounts. To celebrate their staggering, historic victory, Titan Pharma decided to host a massive, highly publicized global launch gala. They rented the grand ballroom of the most expensive luxury hotel in Manhattan. The guest list included hundreds of powerful politicians, billionaire investors, and the top medical journalists from around the world. The event was designed to publicly unveil the integration of the Aegis AI into Titan Pharma's massive, national hospital network, initiating the software live on stage for the entire world to see. Julian and Mia were the guests of honor. They had purchased custom, insanely expensive designer clothing, and they walked the red carpet hand in hand, completely dropping the facade of being just brother and sister-in-law. They were flaunting their stolen wealth and their toxic romance in front of the flashing cameras, deeply, arrogantly believing they had successfully committed the perfect, untouchable crime. I did not receive an invitation to the launch gala, of course, but Marcus, my brilliant attorney, had easily secured me a press credential under the guise of a freelance medical technology reporter. I walked into the crowded, glittering ballroom wearing a razor-sharp, tailored black suit, my hair pulled back severely, blending perfectly into the sea of journalists and photographers. I positioned myself near the front of the massive stage, hidden in the dark shadows of a large lighting rig. The atmosphere in the room was electric with the promise of unprecedented medical advancement and massive financial profit. The CEO of Titan Pharma, a ruthless man named Richard Sterling, stepped up to the podium. Julian and Mia stood proudly right behind him, beaming with sheer blinding pride. They were standing at the absolute, glittering pinnacle of their stolen empire, entirely unaware that the foundation beneath their feet was packed with digital C4. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Sterling boomed into the microphone, his voice echoing off the massive crystal chandeliers. Tonight, Titan Pharma makes history. Thanks to the brilliant, tireless leadership of Julian and Mia, we have successfully acquired the Aegis diagnostic AI. We are no longer just treating disease, we are predicting it. And tonight, we aren't just going to tell you about it. We are going to show you. He gestured grandly to a massive 60-foot LED screen behind the podium. We are going to connect the Aegis algorithm directly to our live National Hospital mainframe. You will see it process real-time patient data and issue flawless, life-saving diagnostics right before your very eyes. Julian stepped forward, looking incredibly suave, and proudly tapped a key on a sleek laptop resting on the podium, initiating the massive live integration. He had just willingly connected my poison decoy to a live network. I stood in the shadows, my heart pounding with a cold, terrifying anticipation. The moment the decoy algorithm touched the live, encrypted real-world data, the dormant logic bomb violently awakened. For the first 30 seconds, the massive LED screen displayed a beautiful, sleek interface, smoothly processing data streams. The crowd murmured in polite awe. Then, the catastrophic hallucination began. The screen suddenly flashed a harsh, glaring yellow. A massive list of patient diagnostics began rapidly scrolling across the screen, but the results were horrifying, absolute gibberish. The AI was diagnosing a 25-year-old male athlete with late-stage ovarian cancer. It was recommending heavy, lethal doses of chemotherapy for patients with minor sinus infections. It was aggressively clearing patients with massive, highly visible brain tumors as perfectly healthy. The highly advanced $3 billion medical miracle was having a massive, violent digital stroke live on stage. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the hundreds of elite medical professionals and journalists in the audience. They instantly recognized that the software was not just failing. It was a catastrophic, lethal liability that could kill thousands of people if deployed. Richard Sterling's confident smile violently vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. "Cut the feed. Disconnect the servers immediately," he screamed frantically at his technical team, sprinting away from the podium. Julian was violently hyperventilating, frantically mashing the keys on his laptop, completely unable to stop the massive cascade of lethal errors. Mia covered her mouth in absolute horror, her face turning the color of wet ash. But the massive LED screen wasn't finished. The logic bomb executed its final, devastating payload. The screen went pitch black for 3 agonizing seconds. When the massive screen illuminated again, it did not display medical data. It brightly displayed the heavily encrypted digital watermark I had hard-coded into the root directory. The stark white text stretched 60 feet across the stage. Unauthorized decoy build. Property of Harlow. This software was stolen and deployed without compliance by Julian and Mia. Before the crowd could even process the massive revelation, the screen shifted again, this time displaying high-resolution screenshots of the text messages from the hidden flash drive. The massive screen broadcasted Julian and Mia's sordid affair, their explicit confessions of fabricating the data breach to frame me, and their detailed conspiracy to defraud Titan Pharma. The damning, inescapable evidence was 60 feet tall, illuminated under the bright stage lights, impossible to ignore and impossible to deny. The entire massive corporate fraud was laid bare for the entire world to see. Total absolute chaos erupted in the grand ballroom. The journalists were in a frenzy, their cameras flashing aggressively, capturing the greatest, most spectacular corporate meltdown in modern medical history live on international streams. Richard Sterling turned on Julian, his face purple with blinding, terrifying rage. "You sold us a fake," Sterling screamed, lunging at my husband. "You committed multi-billion-dollar corporate fraud." Julian stumbled backward, tripping over a microphone stand and crashing hard onto the stage. He looked out at the furious crowd, completely terrified, entirely trapped in the harsh glare of the spotlights. I stepped out of the shadows, walking slowly and calmly up the center stairs to the main stage. The chaotic crowd parted for me, their eyes fixed on my sharp, unrelenting expression. Julian and Mia looked up, and when they saw me, their souls completely left their bodies. "Hello, Julian." "Hello, Mia," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the deafening noise of the panicked crowd. "You wanted my intellect to build your kingdom. I hope you enjoy the view from the throne." Mia fell to her knees, sobbing hysterically, desperately trying to grab my hand. "Harlow, please. We didn't mean to. It was Julian's idea, he forced me," she shrieked, instantly viciously turning on her lover to save her own skin. Julian stared at her in absolute, horrified betrayal. Before he could even respond, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the ballroom were violently thrown open. Dozens of heavily armed, fully tactical FBI agents and SEC investigators flooded into the room, their badges shining in the light. They marched directly up to the stage, grabbing Julian and Mia roughly by the arms and violently clicking heavy metal handcuffs around their wrists. "Julian and Mia," the lead federal agent boomed, "you are under arrest for massive wire fraud, corporate espionage, and criminal conspiracy." The legal and public fallout was incredibly swift, brutal, and totally absolute. Because Titan Pharma had attempted to deploy a dangerously flawed, unauthorized medical device, their stock price plummeted by 60% overnight, costing their shareholders billions. Eager to distance themselves from the catastrophic scandal, they enthusiastically cooperated with the federal prosecutors, pouring their infinite legal resources into completely crushing Julian and Mia. Facing insurmountable, undeniable digital evidence and the massive wrath of a highly aggressive federal government, both of my betrayers were forced to accept brutal plea deals. Julian was sentenced to 25 years in a high-security federal penitentiary. Mia, completely stripped of her stolen wealth and publicly humiliated on a global scale, received 20 years. They were completely, utterly ruined, left with absolutely nothing but cold steel bars and the devastating memory of their own bottomless greed. With the massive, highly toxic weight of my betrayers permanently removed from my life, I emerged from the ashes stronger and more powerful than ever before. Because Julian and Mia's fraudulent actions were federally voided, the sale of Aegis was legally annulled. I retained 100% absolute, unassailable ownership of my company and my authentic, flawless algorithm. 6 months later, acting entirely on my own terms, I rebranded the company as Apex Medical Innovations. I officially launched the real fully functional AI software. It performed beautifully, saving thousands of lives and revolutionizing the global medical industry. I became a billionaire, a highly respected industry titan, and a woman who absolutely refused to ever be a silent, naive victim. My husband and sister tried to steal my life's work for a massive payout, deeply believing I was just a quiet architect who would fade away. They learned the hardest, most devastating lesson imaginable. When you try to steal from the woman who writes the code, she will gladly program your absolute, terrifying destruction.